And I'm underneath and intangible. Bet you didn't think so, I can make you do panoramic views. Look, I'll make it all manageable. Pick and choose, sit and boots, all you different groups. Chicks and dudes, who you think is really kicking dudes? Picture you getting down in the prison too. Like you with a few. You think it's fictional, mythical, maybe spiritual. Here's your view, you're too crazy, you're lifeless. But those are definition for what life is, are priceless to you. Because I'll put you on the house. Should your life get gun smoking, righteous with gun toting, psychic among no possessual one. I am not happy. I'm feeling glad I got that sunshine. In a bag, I'm useless. The not the line, the future is coming on. I'm not happy. I'm feeling glad I got sunshine. In a bag, I'm useless. But not for long. The future is coming on. It's coming on. It's coming on. It's coming on. It's coming on. The essence, the basics, allow me to make this, allow me to make this your childlike in nature. Rhythm, you have it or you don't, that's the policy I'm in the. Every sprout tree, every child a piece, every cloud you see. You see with your eyes, I see destruction in the mind, corruption in the skies, call me fucking enterprise. Now I'm sucking to your lies, new bustle, not the clutcher, but the clutcher through the rhyme. For me it's like y'all can see me now, cause you don't see with your eye. You can see with your mind, that's the end. So I'ma stick around with Steph and be your mentor. But the few rounds of motherfuckers remember where the bar is. I brought all this so you can survive. When law is lawless, the fearless sensations that you thought were dead. Don't squeal and remember. There's a very distinct reason I picked that track. So, Clint Eastwood was written by Gorillaz, which was a band that formed in 1990. The whole song is talking about public corruption and cannabis consumption. Two things that are very important when we're looking at George Trout. So, good morning guys, my name is Nathaniel. I work for a company, an imaginary company that we made up a couple of years ago called Freeweed. At first it originally started as a joke. Just simply, it was before cannabis was a white market and a gray market. It was back then when it was black market. So I just kind of went around and I created an idea. I didn't really have anything with it. I just created a moniker and a logo and we went somewhere with it. So basically, I went to school at the Houston Academy for Cannabis Science about 2 years ago. I was DJing and my dad was like, yo, you need to get your life together and go do something. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll go to school. So I learned about hemp link to fiber ratios and how to grow hemp and a bunch of fun stuff. And while I got into the industry, I was super scared because I kept seeing big corporations and a lot of different factors that were slipping in, variables that were left unchecked. And I thought it was up to us as the public to point out some of these things. Now, I didn't create a PowerPoint. I'm doing this kind of loosely, so most of this is just going to be a Q&A so I can fill in your questions. But I do have kind of a general spiel about Mr. George Trout. So, who is George? Where did he come from? Why is his name keep getting brought up into the hemp space? Well, first off, he was one of the first hemp farmers in America in Texas to get federal permission to grow. So on a federal level, he was okay, because back then, as all of you guys know, we were super dependent on hemp. It was in everything. In fact, it was illegal not to grow it. There was actually a time in America where you would get fined if you were not growing if you had a certain amount of acreage. So the reason that George Trout stood so much out to me whenever I was looking at the history is because I talked to a gentleman named Les Stark. He was a historian from Pennsylvania, and he actually has a really good blog post about a lot of the history with this gentleman. And him and I got to talking kind of inner circles, you know, one of those people you spend 6 hours with on the phone that you've never met before, and you're trying to get as much general information as you can, and they're just overloading your brain, and you're like, wow, I'm glad that I talked to you. And he was supposed to come here this weekend, but unfortunately he went to another hemp convention. His wife is here though. If you do bump into them, they are the people with the, the Hemp Association. I already forgot the name. My bad, I smoke a lot of weed. Anybody else a stoner that just kind of wandered in here? No, y'all So, when I was studying him, I learned a lot about prohibition in general. I found out that basically this led into the Nixon administration, like this level of corruption. It literally went all the way up into it. So let's rewind. In 1906, the poison laws were enacted in New York. So basically, everybody used to be able to grow cannabis and hemp. The same thing, by the way, virtually no different. Just what our government defines as a difference. But hey, we all know that the government isn't right about everything, right? We're finding that out more and more. So basically, the poison laws in 1906 were established in New York for the pharmaceutical companies, so there could be some form of paperwork and some paper trail for them to actually work on tinctures, because there were a lot of hash dens and opium dens in New York City. It was actually rampant with them. There was about 500 of them that they didn't have business licenses. They were just, this little dude's house that you go into on either the Asian side of town or maybe the Middle Eastern side of town, and you could go do, some opium and some hash. So this was pain management control back in 1906, right? So Big Bad Pharma, they started revving up and they started teaming up with the banks, and they decided that they did not want to work with at all the public on this matter. They actually decided to work with the government directly, and by doing so, they enacted this kind of BS law at the time where if you were basically trying to pass anything off as a prescription, unless you had your ducks in a row and you were teamed up with one of these prescription industries, you basically had to label your tincture or your vials as poison. So what you would do is you put a skull and a crossbones on it and just put the words poison, and that was a day. You could literally sell anything you wanted to that way. Even stuff that was completely harmful for people, such as opioids, could be manufactured in someone's house, and they could sell it out of the back of a wagon or a store just as long as it was labeled as poisons. So at first this was just to check opium, and then they included hash in the phrasing and the language of the bill, and when it passed, it was only established in New York. So Texas, being kind of a wild, wild west at the time, cowboys, every time we are watching any of these old movies, like Tombstone, we kind of have a reference on these poison laws. I don't remember if it was Doc's or whose wife, but she was addicted to opium in the movie, and that was actually really how it was back then. A lot of people were addicted to these tinctures and these vials because they were mixed up full of stuff. Their cough syrup had cocaine in it, for heck's sake. So it's like, the poison laws were in effect to try to protect the public, but at the same time, it allowed, malicious medicine to be pushed onto the market, and it couldn't be labeled as such. They had to just completely put that skull and crossbones on it. So fast forward to about 1936. So the poison laws have already been established in New York, and they're kind of trickling down, but a lot of the Southerners didn't want that kind of carpetbagger mentality entering Texas and that Texas space. So what they had established was the federal government was going to give permission to several people to either produce some of the things that were going to go into these prescription drugs, or they were just going to axe them. One of the things they axed, obviously, was opium, because they just didn't want to grow it here. They thought that it was too volatile of a substance to be given to the public consumption. Now, hash somehow fell under this category, which isn't actually cannabis. It's just the sticky, icky, gooey little crystals that go onto it that are compressed. So it wasn't really like it was that big of a problem back then. It was just like they needed to categorize a bunch of substances under that. So like I said, fast forward to 1936, we enter George Trout. It's around October, and he's talking to an Awanas club, and he has very high hopes for where the direction of everything is going. He's like, man, I'm really optimistic. He's talking to all these people, and he's giving all these speeches, and when I teamed up with Les Stark, he gave me this excellent source that you guys can get. It's about a $100 subscription, but I highly recommend it. It's called newspapers.com. You will be able to source anything you want that's ever been printed. You will be able to find it within seconds. You can do keyword searches. Les did the benefit of actually paying for the subscription, so I was able to source all this information for free. So I just want to give a big thank you to him for actually providing me with these binders full of all this information. This is just about 1/4 of all the different paperwork I have on this. So we're going to fast forward real quick to 2014 to about now, where we're establishing 1325 in these hemp laws. So here's the funny thing. The language of these bills is very similar to the language of the bills that they enacted with the federal government back then. You see, the big problem with George Trout is that they couldn't test between marijuana and hemp. Couldn't find the two, right? It's kind of ironic that we're dealing with the same situation now. In fact, it's even more so ironic that one of these bills, the marijuana tax stamp, was passed the day that George Trout died. So it's almost ironic. It's almost cyclical, what we're dealing with. It's a complete rewind of history, and we're entering that phase right now. And the biggest problem it is that you have big corporations and government entities that do not want us to have this most powerful resource. They'd like to capitalize off of it. They'd like to create protocols and different stipulations like they did in 1936 to prevent farmers from actually making any money. And when I mean farmers, I mean local farmers that actually have their boots in the ground, that are actually working, not these big corporation Monsanto giants. So these people back then, they had federal permission to grow in 1936 through the federal government, but the state government at the time was flip-flopping. We had a governor lady who won twice. Her name was Ma. And back then, Democrats and Republicans were flip-flopped. Kind of hard to believe, but their issues clashed. And she was running against this gentleman. And I say gentleman, he was really a douchebag. His name was Alfred. He was incredibly racist. And he did not like that there was a woman that was in governorship. Her husband had won, I think, like 3 or 4 times in a row. So it was kind of one of those things that a family was trying to stay, in government, but it wasn't like they were bad people. Actually, looking back at these issues, I can see that Ma was a really good person, and she was trying to build a community, and she was scared that these politician-esque types would get into these positions of power and basically get away from agricultural commodities and move into more of a capitalistic, big business sort of thing. And all of her fears were very much right, because Alfred, the second that he stepped in, he basically started investigating the marijuana growing on George Trout's land. So what really happened is around 1937, so we'll go right back into that time, there was a young boy, and this is the really hard part of the story for me to accept, because, and I have to put a little bit of phrasing on this before I go into it. When you base laws off of illogical fallacies, it's like a bad seed. It just builds a bad tree, you get bad fruit. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And so when they established this law, it was based off false pretenses. And those false pretenses make me sick to my stomach. It actually makes me come to these conventions. It makes me seek more information out about the subject, because I feel like the truth needs to be unveiled, which is essentially, in the newspaper articles of what we have found out, when I went to Les Stark's site, it said that there was an escaped convict that these gentlemen were looking for. That's not true. I did a lot more research. I talked to Corpus Christi Sheriff's Department. I talked to some lawyers out there. I actually talked to somebody that's about 90 years old that sort of remembers the incident. They had basically lived in that area for such a long time, and they were really hard of hearing, so it was very awkward to talk to them on the phone. And what we have established is prohibition was actually not kicked off from the marijuana tax stamp or these poison laws. It was actually more so established as systematic racism. You see, what had happened at the time is there was a gentleman named Harry Anslinger, and this guy was like the worst. He was in bed with big paper, big timber, big housing, big pharmaceutical. He had people that were working in the government that were creating smear campaigns against people of color. And Texas had just gotten its independence, not even 100 years prior, right? So we're looking at a totally different frame of thinking. People were really segregated back then and really narrow-minded. And unfortunately, Alfred was one of those people, the newly elected governor. And what he had established is he wanted to investigate these marijuana/hemp fields, because he had heard that these were a dirty drug called hashish. Now, marijuana is a made-up word. It was made up based off the word marijuana, which actually isn't that bad of a word. The reason that they used it is kind of a fear, striking thing. Like, oh, these dirty foreigners are gonna come over and they're gonna bring their drugs, and they just smeared the whole campaign to make it look very whitewash. And the reason they went after George Trout wasn't necessarily the hemp. It was the fact that George Trout was working with people of color. He was working with Chinese immigrants that had gone over from the gold rush that the gold rush was over, so they needed a place to work. He was working with migrant workers from Mexico that were basically lower, and you gotta remember, this was right in the valley. So what we have established is that is the perfect place for growing cannabis. One of the best spots all around the world. In fact, there's a newspaper article from 1937 that compares Kentucky to Texas, and it says that Texas has a much better climate to grow. And Kentucky had a way more established hemp reputation. So what it basically led to is these people saw that this man was about to position himself and he was about to help people. Now the other group of people he was working with was former slaves and people that were basically kin of former slaves. So the Corpus Christi Sheriff's Department did not like this at all. So they sent investigation into these fields. Now they put out a false report, and I've done a lot of digging and I just can't find it. I don't know if they don't have the paperwork, or maybe just the police force just kind of changed how they do their paperwork in like the 70s or something. I don't know. We're trying to trace back to 1936, and I wasn't given a lot of information, to try to dig. So I had to call multiple sheriff's departments. I had to figure out which county this was in. I had no help for any of this, by the way. It was just blind calling. And what I've established is back in 1936, if you were convicted of a crime and you were a person of color, there was no trial, there was no jury, there was a rope in a tree. And that is fucked up to me. Pardon my language, but that is just a poor excuse for justice. So Prohibition actually got kicked off by not an escaped convict, but by an 11-year-old boy. You see, George Trout had a huge field full of these flowers, and he actually knew the multi-uses of hemp. So when he taught this 11-year-old boy on how to pick hemp, he was picking flowers for his mother, his sick mother. So they grabbed this little boy, they pulled him out of the field, and they hung him. And that's how Prohibition got started. They used that as an example to fearmonger people into not growing hemp. It has nothing to do with an escaped convict. I've called the sheriff's department, I've verified this information with actual sheriffs. They told me that back then, they didn't convict people of crimes and that they were very ashamed that that's how the justice system works, but they didn't have a better explanation for me. I was appalled. That means that most of the laws that we're going off of are based off racism. How does that even make sense? How do we establish a law to try to incarcerate and hurt people just because we don't want the rest of the herd to pull ahead? So what we're dealing with right now is about a 70-year-old devious plot, an evil, sinister plot by villains, true villains, who want to capitalize off this resource and make it hard for every single person in this room that plans to grow. Part of their process was trying to use newspaper articles to smear people. So we go back to 1936, using newspaper.com, and we see contradictory articles. We see in 1936, hemp's the greatest, we're gonna do big things, George Trout's doing this, George Trout's doing that, he's talking to these people, he's got close to 500 acres. The dude had close to what would be considered a $25 million investment today. He actually had one of the very first decornicators just for him. And we might have actually tracked down that decornicator, just on a side note. We're looking into the history of it to make sure it's the exact one, but we think it is because it's in that county at that time, and it could have been very well his. Not too many people at the time in that area were really big into farming because most of the land owners had quite a bit of land back then. So fast forward to today, where we've established these hemp laws, right? 1325, which to me is kind of a joke. I actually showed up to the 1325 hearing. This is the copy of it. It's ripped in half. I ripped it in half right in front of them because I was really angry, because the language in that basically states that every single person that's growing is going to become a next George Trout. When I went to the Waco hearing for him, I read the little packet they gave us, that little dirty piece of paper that Sid Miller printed. I don't understand why they can't do it electronic either. We're in 2020, But regardless, we got these printed documents, and part of the language in the documents is that DEA can come onto your land, they can look at all of your records, they can look at all of your plants, they can seize anything that they want, and etc. Etc. They literally put ETC dot. What does etc. mean? Does etc. mean that you can come onto my land and take 11-year-old boys? Because I don't think that's cool. I don't know why I'd have an 11-year-old boy on my land, but if he was picking flowers for his mother, I'd have some questions. So George Trout also had some questions. He was really frustrated. He did everything right he could. He had permission from the federal government, and the state government at the time was like, no, you don't. And he was like, yes, I do. And they're like, no, you don't. Try it. And they did try it. And you know what? They burned his entire crop. They literally went out there and just torched it all. They cut it all down and torched it. And he was pretty heartbroken. He lost, a worker, and then he just lost his whole investment. And he tried to recover the pieces. He tried to, talk to people to get the word out and stuff. He even tried to sue. He was on his way to Chicago taking a train, and then mysteriously died of a heart attack, which I find very, very weird. The day that he died, by the way, was October 1st, the next year, 1937. Anybody know what that date was? It's the same day that the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act came into effect. Weird, right? Like this whole kind of like he just dies and then that day a bill comes out. It was like the final nail on the coffin for him. We had such an optimistic future ahead of us. We were going to go green. We were looking at, the next textile, the next plastic, the next thing that was going to feed us all, the next thing that was going to be used as nutrition, the next thing that was going to be used as a medicine, housing. I mean, I could go on and on. There's a literal book here that I bought by this amazing man named Jack Hare that talks a lot about the conspiracy behind this. It's called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And this book right here talks about first off, that hemp is one of the most powerful economic resources that we have available on this planet. It literally can do everything. The other thing that this book talks about is the form of corruption, the amount of whitewashing that this industry got. It's really pathetic to me that we're living in this parallel right now. I'm actually disgusted a lot of the time when I talk about this, and the reason that I'm disgusted is because when you base something off of a logical fallacy, you're going to see bad fruit from it. You're going to see bad seeds, you're going to see a bad tree, and we're just going to continue to trickle down this notion until we all fight for what I believe George Trout was trying to go for, which was full plant access. Now, what does full plant access mean to me? I actually made a list of all the things that I believe that I can help with. One of the things that I can help with, didn't print it off, never mind. One of the things that I can help with is basically people not playing Monopoly with other people's housing. Now, what does that mean? That means that basically, if you're convicted of a drug conviction, somebody can tell you which apartment you can and cannot get, even if it's a marijuana charge. I feel like a big reason that these corporations were doing this, so let's fast forward to the Nixon administration, was to play Monopoly with these communities. So the way that they were doing it is, and this is an actual quote from, let's see if I can pull it up. I have it in here. This is an actual quote from the former Nixon administration. Give me 2 seconds, guys. Sorry, I had to print off the 90-page proposed thing. This is Sid Miller's proposed plan for the USDA, which I don't feel it. This was the other thing that he passed out. This was the Texas Hemp Program, applying for a license, which George Trout had, by the way. He had a federal license, so not much good that's going to give you, because the DEA can just run up on your land and take what they want. Wish I could find that quote from the former Nixon administration, though, but it was basically talking about separating people's housing and being able to here we go. Oh, my paperwork. Should have put together a PowerPoint. I feel bad. Here it is. So you really want to know what this is about. The Nixon campaign in 1968 had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to either be against the war or to be black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt their communities, we could arrest their leaders, we could raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. His name was John Richmond, and you can read all about his funny racism and all the crazy things that the Nixon administration did. So he was basically riding off the fear campaign of Harry Anslinger. He was just riding on that wave. So we go from 1936, nothing changing, 1937, marijuana is illegal, all the way up into, I believe, there was a specific law that they passed around 1968. It's failing me right now, but it was basically with the Nixon administration. So they could disrupt homes. So they could start surveillance. So they could crack down on people. And that's just messed up to me. That basically means that since the get of this whole thing, we've basically just been oppressing people for trying to use this as a commodity. So, after, Watergate, he got kicked out of office. We fast forwarded to 2014, where the Farm Bill was actually enacted. I believe that it had good intentions when they were trying to come up with it. They were like, we have to come up with a way that people can actually make money off of this. We have to come up with a way that we can actually think about this correctly. And I hope that this is opening you guys' minds to the potential that these bills, can they be altered? Absolutely. And we should look to try to help as many people as we can when we're opening up this bill. I don't think that 1325 is really inclusive or exclusive. I think it's more so that just big corporations can make that money. So the reason that I had a problem with these bills is because, like I said, we're gonna have a room full of George Trouts. We're gonna have a whole state full of George Trouts. It's basically opening up the door to 1937 prohibition again. Because even though George Trout had permission to grow, the governor said he was mistaken. So that was just on a whim. If anybody can just decide in government that they want to change something or remove something, they pretty much can. It's all a money motive. They literally just have to shell out the money to make it happen. And we see it time and time again in our political system, where people are just taking advantage of the system. And it is downright poor. So how do we avoid the pitfalls? Well, we go to full plant access. That means that everybody can grow. So home grow is the only way that this is going to work. And big business should support home grow. The other day, I uploaded on my Facebook an article by Forbes that it said that big businesses should support home grow, and it had about 50 different reasons why. And I believe that it drives a competitive market. I don't know if you guys know about something called the dark web, but it's basically where you can access a portal on your computer to a dark part of the internet, and you can buy anything. You can buy llamas, you can buy drugs, you can buy land, you can buy anything you want on the dark web. Why do I bring this up during a hemp convention? Well, there's something I learned about the dark web that blew my mind, and that is reviews. Believe it or not, you can actually log on the dark web, buy drugs, you can buy cocaine, and you can rate the person on there and give them reviews. So why is this important to today's market? Well, that's a competitive market right there. That model works so well that these people, what they do is they create a tag name. So you got some dude, let's call him Boo Bear. So Boo Bear, let's say he's got the best hash online. He's got 5-star reviews all the way down. Just keeps going, 5-star review, 5-star review, 5-star review. So me, as somebody that smokes a lot of cannabis, I'm going to purchase some. So I purchase some on the dark web. I get some from this guy with the 5-star reviews. I get it, it's good. I give him the 5-star. The reason that this works is because it forces all of these anonymous people to compete. So everybody's trying to get that tag name that they stick with. And it's like a designer drug kind of feel. And you follow that little chart, that little dark web chart of, when it gets shipped out and everything, and it's really discreet, and it makes a lot of sense to, somebody that's kind of under the radar, that they would be able to do something like this. And the reason that I bring this up is because I personally believe that if you drive a competitive market very similar to that, where you're not really focused on basically presenting your stuff, going out there and making it, it's really just based on product and reviews, that you're gonna actually be able to bloom up the market and help people, where the price of a gram will go to $5 and it won't be competitive as much because the cream of the crop will rise to the top. And you will literally watch that happen all the time on the dark web, where these people get these static rate reviews, and it's all peer review. It's not like that guy's going on there himself and giving himself Amazon reviews. He's just simply has a good customer base. So that's what I'd like to try to help establish with the cannabis market, is that you have all these people home growing, you have all these people that can sell their stuff, and there's very little regulation on it. Because why would you regulate a tomato? Why would you regulate turmeric? Why would you regulate cinnamon? You can get high off of cinnamon, it has cannabinoids. You can get totally blazed off cinnamon. why regulate these things? Why even try to? Because all it does is add additional stress to a system that has already been, like I said, rooted from a logical fallacy. Now, do I believe that anybody should be able to buy cannabis? Absolutely not. I do not believe if you're 8 years old, you can go into a gas station and just lay down 20 bucks and get a couple of grams. That seems ridiculous. What I'm talking about with full plant access is people being able to home grow and establish themselves. Because then we're not having to worry about in the market, is this company labeling for pesticides? Is this company labeling for THC? How much percentage does this have? Blah, blah, blah. That should be the consumer's problem. And I know that that's kind of seems whack, coming from my generation, but I really don't feel like over-regulation is going to help this market at all. In fact, it's going to cripple and destroy it because that's what it did to George Trout. They couldn't tell the difference between marijuana and hemp back then. And now we do have sophisticated technology. Now we do have liquid, I always mispronounce this word, chromatography, is that right? I think I did it right? Basically the scanners that can see how much CBD content your plant has. All this does is it helps line up labs, money with pockets. It really doesn't help the system itself. Yes, it's cool to third-party test, and yes, it's good to know what's in your product, but like I said, that should be coming from a consumer standpoint. If I'm growing a plant at my house, I should take it to the tester. I should do all the work for this. I shouldn't buy cannabis at the store and have to, worry about if it's got a third-party lab review or something like that. I don't do that with my tomatoes. My tomatoes don't have a QR code. The fact that we're over-regulating this is just, like I said, it's just a means to seize a monopoly. It's just an example for these corporations and these people to just basically walk all over the American public like they've been doing so. And if you don't believe me, Meridol, one of the prescription marijuana drugs, did you know that they are actually finding out it's not really effective? Yet they've sold over $1.5 billion worth of that stuff. And they're finding out that it actually doesn't even help anybody because they've stripped it of all of the things it needs. So now we're pushing out prescription drugs based off cannabis that aren't even helping people. Wow, that sounds like the opioid crisis all over again. Because every single time, and I work at a CBD shop, every single time I have a customer that comes in and they talk to me, and they tell me that they used to be addicted to opioids, my heart just breaks a little bit more. I have seen and talked to probably about 1,000 people in the last 2 years that have just gotten off opioids because the VA took them off, or their doctor no longer wants to give them, a prescription for it, which is totally understandable. It's a very dangerous substance. And we're now into that gray market where people are now trying to buy this stuff because they think it's going to help them when they can't get it from a doctor. Whenever we all know in this room that hemp and cannabis could literally save their lives. In fact, our government, people in our government that are deciding these laws could actually benefit from these medications. And I am talking about Greg Abbott, and I am talking about Dan Patrick. Greg Abbott, from my understanding, suffers from depression. That's one thing that cannabis can help with. He had 2 suicide attempts on his life prior, but you guys didn't know that. He's our elected leader. Our lieutenant governor is a sad man. Dan Patrick had an incident Greg Abbott, who's the one in the chair? My bad, I'm mixing them up. Greg Abbott's the one in the chair. He suffered an accident a couple of years ago. He has really, really bad pain in his lower back, yet is still taking prescription drugs, though cannabis can help. So even our government, even the leaders that we've elected, these people that I didn't vote for, they're putting really big stoppers on this. And we're watching them put those stoppers, and we're not able to do anything. Because I don't remember us getting to vote about cannabis or hemp. I don't remember one bill coming out that the public got to vote on. But you know what we have to do? We have to wait for sessions every 2 years before we can decide on these laws. So when I went to the 1325 hearing for sessions, I learned something in that room. I learned that the Texas economy of independent farmers is super strong. I learned that a lot of them are veterans, and God bless them, because they fought tooth and nail to at least get that established. I listened to hundreds of farmers pour in their information, come from all parts of Texas, and come together with the same motive. And they accomplished so much during this session. So we had over 63 bills for cannabis filed. I know because I was there almost every single day of the summer. And a lot of these lobbyist groups, they gatekept people like me from actually talking to political leaders. Probably because I'm foul-mouthed, and probably because I look like a millennial punk. But my voice is the same as anybody else in this room. And everybody should have that freedom to have an ongoing conversation with their government. So when I tried to pass my letters as to why I believe we got full plant access to Dan Patrick and the back of the sessions floor, he told me simply, I don't care. And then I was escorted out of the room. That's the people we're dealing with right now. I don't care. Well, I do care. During that sessions period, I actually had a really close friend of mine that was in jail for concentrates. He was a black dude, known him for years, and he got 2 years charged. He was actually about to get out in 6 months. And the day that I testified, that night, he was stabbed in jail to death because he had ratted on a white supremacist group that had tried to punk him. He is a very geeky guy. I miss him very much. I used to play a lot of video games with him, and I'm not going to say his name just out of memorial because I really care about him. But when he was stabbed, it took a lot for me to go into that with it was like that meeting with a very heavy heart, because I basically just relived that whole George Trout thing. I was still irritated about that, and now one of my friends, a person of color, was personally affected by this. The reason that he had rolled on that group is because he wasn't part of a gang, and they were messing with people that were independents and stuff, and he just didn't have a fighting chance. I got a letter about 4 or 5 days prior to him getting stabbed that said, the walls are closing in, I want to get out, I want to get out, I want to get out. And I didn't know how to feel after that, walking into that sessions meeting with that weight on my shoulder. Because I can't imagine what George Trout was going through whenever he was riding that train to Chicago when he died of that heart attack. I can imagine whenever you're trying to go defend somebody and you're trying to go, fight for somebody that's no longer around, how much that pulls into you. And I know that every single person in this room probably has one of those personal battles that they've had with the cannabis and hemp industry, where there's somebody that they've had that's affected, and yeah, there's people all around us profiting from this. And part of me is okay with that. I think that these CBD shops are doing a lot of good for people, but part of me is not okay with that, because we shouldn't be profiting, we shouldn't be moving forward if people are still in jail. Plain and simple. There should be no reason that those people aren't let out. At least get them out of the jail first. It's okay if we have to establish some protocol, some record, some established database that they were a prior drug conviction or whatever. These are non-violent offenders. These are people my age that are being incarcerated in masses. And I got arrested a couple of years ago for a pot charge. And believe it or not, it probably was under 0.3 hemp, because back then cannabis really wasn't that good. It was like 7-8 years ago. And I got arrested for about that much. That was $2,000 out of my pocket, a day in jail, but that's because I'm white. And that's fucked up. I shouldn't have gotten in and out that quick. And my friend, he should have gotten in and out a lot faster. He shouldn't have been sitting out, waiting time. That's pointless. That affected his education. This man was gonna go be a botanist. That's one botanist now that we don't have in the world. And every day I have to think about things like that when I enter the cannabis space and the hemp space. I have to think about all the people that we've lost. All these books that have been written about all these people in the past, and how we can relive their memory and how we can help them out. So I've done a lot of talking, and I'd like to open up the floor to some Q&A, get you guys some question and answers for the rest of the time. I kind of said all the things that I wanted to. Is that cool with you guys? You guys have any questions about George Trout or anything I can break apart for y'all? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you mentioned that George Trout was from and down by Corpus.
Yes, sir.
Do you know the closest town or?
Absolutely, absolutely. So my information right here shows that you actually have 2 giant farms. So let me look it up real quick, just so I can. Let's see about that one. I believe it was the valley. I believe he was between Corpus and the valley, all the way up to almost El Paso, if I'm not mistaken. Because the towns were really, really far from each other at the time. We didn't really have I think we had Austin, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso, Rio Grande. Corpus was established. There was quite a few of them though. He had one big grow-off, but the problem was at the time is the government thought that he had a bunch of little grow-offs all over the place, and that wasn't simply true. Hemp was rampant. It just grew everywhere, and even if you pollinated and grew in one particular plot of land, you can pretty much count on those seeds, or I'm sorry, not those seeds, those males pollinating seeds up to 80 miles away. Like that is a fact we have found in cannabis, that you could literally, you could have one person in Colorado almost on the other side, and then they're still gonna get pollination because it travels through wind currents. So what wound up happening is the valley was rooted all with hemp, and it was rooted out, so it wasn't even like actually like cannabis. And they just went out and torched it. They just kept getting mad of seeing hemp fields on the side of the road.
The reasoning behind my question is
Yes, sir.
that I work with a lot of farmers in marketing their crop.
Yes, sir.
And their questions, the questions that we're getting is where is the best place to grow hemp in Texas?
Definitely the valley.
How are the conditions really, where are they really the most conducive?
They were, because the Gulf of Mexico at the time, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a movie called Pineapple Express, but they actually do talk about a very realistic thing in there. There's a current that comes from Hawaii that hits California, and there's another current that comes down from Washington. It's a low and high pressure system that when they hit each other, the plants just do it right. Well, the Gulf of Mexico is very similar. There's a wave current that comes up in a C crescent shape, and it just brings beautiful, 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 beautiful waves on the shorelines, good sun, good culture. So whenever the article I was talking about, it was a 1936 article basically comparing Kentucky to Texas climate. And they were talking about how the valley had way better soil, way better land, it was way flatter, it was easier to grow, and just the climate at the time. Now, we've entered global warming phases of this planet, so I have zero clue about the soil grade out there now currently, but from my understanding, Texas should be the best place to grow hemp in the world. The only other place that has even a taste or similar atmosphere close to us is Mexico and California. And then the other place that has a very good rich atmosphere that's very similar is across the seas is Italy, and I believe some parts of India near the river. Because they're baking off that current I'm talking about. It's basically like a wind current that allows really good oxygen flow, and it allows really good pollination. So I'm trying to figure it out. It was in Brownsville, by the way, near Raymondville. That was the area. Hope that clarifies. Anybody else have any questions? Oh, come on. Y'all got some then. Yes, sir.
Where's your CBD shop?
Where's my CBD shop? Greenbelt Botanicals. We have 4 locations in Austin. We're located off Westgate and William Cannon. We have another one off South Lamar. And we also have another location that just formed up near the Cove, or the Grove, if you're familiar with that in Austin. It's basically near the lake. And then we have another location off of 290 that's forming in December that we're still doing the build out on. But yeah, I'm really excited. My bosses have been working very hard, very brick and mortar, mom and pop style. Like a little boutique shop basically. And we've actually removed ourselves from the CBD market at one of our locations. We're just calling it a cannabis lounge now. So people can actually roll up and smoke their hemp there. And as we move towards full legalization, which I believe on a federal level we will, then we'll be able to actually, grow and help facilitate growth through our shop, and actually have people come in. It's sort of like a bar too, so we will have like drinks and elixirs and stuff you can mix, live music, that kind of thing. It's like a little hot spot basically. Cool. I hope you come in. If you do, I'll get you on a free joint. Cool. Anybody else have any questions? We're all good? Okay. Well, I would like to leave you guys with one final thought, and that's, where do I fit into the cannabis industry? Well, you fit in where you think that you're going to get full plant access, and I mean that very, very passionately. Find a way to help us, because I don't always want to go to the government during the sessions and do this by myself. Find a good lobby group. Find good information, because it's the best thing you can do is educate yourself in this field. I don't have all the facts, and I have a bunch of different binders of stuff. Nobody has all the information and all the answers. So it's up to you guys to do digging and research on your own accord, so you don't fall into the same pitfalls that George Trout did. Because back then, he separates us so far away from the past. The fact that we can instantly access information. You can fact check something. You could fact check me right now and make sure that all the information I just gave you is real with a Google search. Isn't that beautiful? You basically got a personal BS detector on you all the time. And with that technology, I really hope that you guys can open up your mind and really try to seek full plant access. Because, and what I mean by that is home grow. Don't worry about what 1325 says, because all it says is you can't grow for retail purposes. It doesn't say that you can't home grow. In fact, hemp is decriminalized right now. Go ahead and home grow. Nobody is stopping you. You're going to have some confusion though when the cops try to figure out the difference between marijuana and cannabis. But from my understanding, and I live in the city of Boston, we decrim. So that means that cops don't even have the money to test anymore for these cannabis versus marijuana things. Like the city gave them no budget. And hopefully they do the same thing in Dallas, and hopefully they already did it in San Antonio. But hopefully it just kind of spreads to where you're not having to get convicted of these crimes and suffer. Because until people stop getting incarcerated for hemp, which is cannabis, it's never going to stop. We're just going to keep dealing with the government, pushing us around, telling us what we can, can't grow, telling us about all these regulations that we obviously don't care about. Nobody in this room cares about 0.3 THC. We all know that hemp matures at 1%. That's like just science. Like you need your crops to at least get to a 1%. You need, if you're trying to grow industrial hemp, you want 18-foot high bushes. It don't matter how much THC is in it. You're gonna cut it down and use it for textile anyway, or plastic, or molds, or whatever you're trying to do. So why would you be worried about content of plants? That's just dumb. That's like me worrying how much juice is in an aloe vera leaf. Like, I don't care. It's got a purpose and it's gotta do what it's gotta do. If somebody needs more medicinal cannabis or a higher level of THC, they can get access to that through pharmaceuticals. I'm not discounting that. I'm not saying like, hey, we shouldn't create concentrated forms of this, and those shouldn't be regulated, because hash is a very powerful drug. In fact, in 1936, there was a newspaper article posted where horses could stand straight up and have full surgery on their stomachs and legs and muscles. They could cut them open, and they gave them some hash oil. And they were able to perform on these horses, and these horses didn't mind. Like, that would be like you getting your wisdom teeth pulled out with no anesthesia. That's a really painful experience. I know, I've had 2 wisdom teeth removed, and to think that like you could actually give medication to somebody, work on them, and then be totally cognizant is mind-boggling. And all they used was really, really, really heavily concentrated dabs back then. That's all it was. It was tincture, oil, it's all the same stuff. It's just cannabinoids introduced into some type of fatty thing that can bond with your system. So it's mind-boggling right now how far ahead we can get. So please, oh yes, absolutely.
Do you think personally it's more important to be lobbying on a state level or on a federal level? Right? Do you think Texas will become legal before federal, or federal will force Texas into it?
That is a really, really good question. That kept me up a lot at night for about 2 weeks straight. So, personal opinion, if the election goes the way I think it will, Sanders, then we're gonna move towards full plant access and full decriminalization. If we get El Presidente Cheeto again, not gonna happen. He's already stated that he does not care about cannabis consumption. He doesn't want to help it on a federal level. He doesn't care. So choose very wisely who you vote for this year, because that'll establish on a federal level who's going to say what. Now, as far as state government goes, I do not see Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick changing their MO or their mood. They actually have access to something called a school-to-prison pipeline. You can Google it. They make profit from sticking people in schools that have a little bit of criminal behavioral history straight into the prison system. Isn't that great? It isn't. It's downright pitiful. It's the worst thing I've ever heard. You're taking young youths that basically don't know that they're doing bad things yet because they're still developing, and you're throwing them in. So I don't see on a state level that happening quite yet, unless we get other elected officials. And unless they have a really good change of heart, which if they do, I will bite my tongue and I will literally shut up. But I just don't see that happening. They're very pushy on this. A lot of the elected officials in different cities, though, are helping out. Like I said, Austin decriminalized, San Antonio decriminalized, hopefully Dallas decriminalizes. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. No problem. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, is it about time?
Yeah, baby, you're good.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for joining me. Please Google George Trout and Les Stark if you want more information on this. I'd like to thank him for all the information I give, and then I'd like to give a shout out to Hempcon, Phoenix LLC, and Green Belt. So thank you guys for joining me. I appreciate all of you.